how does that work? Like, let's say if we get given this, we get allocated this size for our organization, if we're working with this right now, but it's too much for us. Like, I don't need this many. So we need a way then to break this down into smaller, multiple networks. So rather than just one big network, one big pie, let's say, for example, I want 4 smaller networks. Well, what we need to now do is to subnet this network. We break it down. And all we want to do is we break down this network into 2, just chop it down the middle. So a single /16 is the same as saying we take 2/17 networks, where the first network starts at the starting point, so this kind of top left corner of the original network here, and it now ends halfway. So visually, it's like saying this /16 has now started. It's the same as saying it's now the same as 2/17s. Okay, so the starting point is still the starting point. We still begin here, but now the halfway point is the point at which the second /17 network starts. So the first subnet is going to be 10.16.0.0 all the way through to one before the next one. So all the way through to 10.16.0.127.255. Okay, remember I said you can only have 256 or 255. That's the maximum you can have in this value. So if I were to add one more, I don't have any space left, so I have to move over to there, raise this up, and that's where we start this next network. So that's the halfway point, basically this middle line. But you notice I've just drawn a line between the two. It's like building a house and saying, okay, this is my plot of land, but I'm just going to draw a line in the sand and say this is where it starts, and now here's the halfway point, here's where the next room starts, and here's the end. But it's still that original floor space. The value of doing this is now we can use these 2 different smaller networks for different things within whatever we want to do. Okay, so we could keep going, and we could follow the same process again if 2's not enough, if we wanted to follow the process again to make more subnets. So again, 16 or 65,000 addresses. What we could do is we could keep the first /17 network, so that's this one at the top in red, but at the bottom, we could break down the bottom one in green, this one there, into 2 smaller further subnets. Okay, so 117 is the same as taking 2/18 networks. And the method would be the same thing. Okay, so the first subnet, bottom left, that would be the starting point of the original bottom left network, so 10.16.128.0. And the smaller, the second small blue network, bottom right, that would then start at the midway point of the original network. So it's like these 2 networks, these 2 subnets, both /18, are half the size each of that original /17. But now we've got 3 subnets. Okay, we've got a room with 3 houses. It's still the original floor space, but we've got a wall to further divide that again. A /17 at the top, like a big master bedroom, and then 2 smaller bedrooms, a /18 to the bottom. And we can follow the process ad infinitum, go again, where, remember, our target is, we said we want 4 subnets. So we break down the top /17 network into, this time, 2/18 networks, which occupy that same space. So the upper left 18 network, that's going to be the original starting point from the previous /17 network, and it ends now at the halfway point. The upper right /18 network, this one there, that then immediately picks up at the midway point and goes right through to the end. So this is subnetting. This is really how it works, is we're trying to decide the size of the network. Dex got it, yeah. Look into that. That's the very next discussion I'm going to come to. Just right now, putting purpose aside, it's like they're just rooms in a house, and we decide what those rooms are in a moment. But the idea is we first gain the ability to chop up the pie into smaller pieces of the pie. So that's why when you see this one, and this is a really nice diagram because it has everything in one go. When you see 0, 0, 0, 0, often you're going to see this as the default route. That's basically matching the entire internet all the way through to a 4/8, which again would have been once a class A network, or a /16, which would have been before a class B network, 4/24, which have been a class C, and then all the way through to 32/32, which gives us a lonely single IP address. Okay, now this will become a lot clearer when you start using this in lab, in production, in just in daily usage. Generally, when you're performing subnetting, you want to be dividing or breaking down a larger network into 2 or 4 or 8 or various smaller networks, always breaking them into 2 and then generally into 2 again. It's unusual, but it is possible, again, like we just saw, to have an odd number of networks, but you might break one into 2 and then only break one in half. So, and then you just keep further breaking this one down. But this is exactly the example of that. So I'm going to, just one last time, okay? Because I know that was a high level process. I've gone through it more graphically, just to take a look at this a little bit more detail this time. I'm glad to see you've got, yeah, I can show the diagram, absolutely. Let's put that there. So just to have a look at this in a bit more detail before we finish, I'm going to use the same example as before. Okay, so we're just going from 10.16.0016, like that's my VPC range. I just started there. But this time with a bit more detail. Okay, so we begin with a /16 network. So in my network space here, my VPC, I think that's what I decided was going to be my size. Yes. So that's my 10.16.0016. I've got a big network, right? So this is my VPC as it is. Assuming I'm going to need 4 smaller networks, the starting point is to calculate the start and the end of the network, of the range. So that's my first thing to work out. In this case, we start at 10.16.0.0/16. Okay, that's where we begin at this. That's our first chair, that's our first IP address. And we finish all the way at the end, well, 255.255. So if we now know that we take any /17 network, which is going to be half of this size of the 16, the step 2 was for us to split that original 16 network into 2 smaller subnets. So the first /17 network, this one here, that's going to be, again, still assuming the starting point of the original network. Nothing's changed. Okay, so 10.16.0.0, 10.16.0.0. But now, because we're half as big, let's stop halfway. That's the halfway point of that original network. Okay, of that 65,000, this is 32 something thousand IP addresses down the line. So 10.16.127.255. And then what then picks up immediately after is, of course, this. So our first 17 is going to be 10.16.0.0/17, all the way through to 10.16.127.255. The second smaller network, this in sick yellow down below, that begins here at the midway point. So 10.16.128, literally one IP address subsequently to this, the halfway point, okay? One more to the right. And then starting at this, finishing, ending at 10.16.255.255. Okay, so remember, we took that original /16 and we put that into 2 this time. We just chopped it up in half. So we now have 2 smaller /17 networks, and each of these smaller subnets occupies half of the original address space. Okay, so subnet 1 starts at the start, subnet 2 starts at the midway point. Does that make sense? So it's like, here's our big 16. Now we say we want to make this into 2, so let's take our first orange, and that starts, well, where it would have started. Sorry, I've gone a little bit to the left there, but imagine that's halfway. And then this yellowish, this greenish one there starts for the remaining half, okay? So at the midway point to the rest, but we're still occupying that original size of the network range. But that's 2, okay? So let's keep going. Let's check out further splitting the same process. So here at 18, each smaller network has a higher prefix value. We've gone from 16 to 17 now to 18, and 18, again, is going to be half of the size of the parent's original network range. It's like, if you really stare at this long enough, let's say, so we got a 16. So that gave us a total of 65,000 IP addresses, because 2 to the power 16 is that many. 17, but remember there's 2 of them, so that's half of that address space, 32. One further, okay, again, halving or subdividing, subnetting that further 16,000 IP addresses. So the higher this prefix value, the smaller the network size. Okay, so again, we'll see the first smaller network, this one in blue, that now starts at the same starting address and finishes halfway. The second one, that starts at the halfway point and then finishes at the end. So in this case, we have 10.16.128.0 and it's 10.16.192.0/18 both. And both of these fill and are within a larger /17 network range of 10.16.128.0. Okay, so just think of this process as splitting a network range in half. So you're going to be subnetting and creating 2 smaller networks. The first of which uses the first half, and the second of which uses the second half. I will do the same process again with the upper subnet this time, with this one. So 10.16.0.0/17. Okay, so the network here in orange, we can split that range in half according to this and take 2 smaller networks. So 10.16.0.0 and 10.16.64.0.18.